Welcome back, welcome back. It's lovely to see you again. Thank you very much for coming and choosing this particular part of the Power Summit. You know, one of the great things I always think about the Power Summit is that there is always something going on somewhere. So wherever you are, as well as conversations and debates and those chance coffee meetings, there will be something that is really significant for your part of the industry. So at the moment, we've got these two power talks going on at the same time. So actually in Helsinki Hall, we're talking AI and data centers. This place, in here, in Finlandia Hall, we're talking about something very different. So keep an eye on the app so that you don't miss anything and get yourself to the discussions that really matter. So in this room, we are now talking about delivering the EU grids ambition. That ambition for the grids, everything that is so important that we've already talked about a lot this morning. Now let's get into the detail of how this is going to work. So I'm delighted to welcome your moderator for this session. She's the head of infrastructure, AI and market intelligence at Eurelectric. Please welcome.
Dear Power Summit, thank you for joining the first Power Talk delivering the EU grids ambition. What we all know in this room, you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yeah, we can now.
Okay,
there we go.
Now. What we all know in this room is that Europe's transition depends on modernized and expanded electricity grids. 70% of renewables are connected at DSO level, and society is increasingly electrified. Our challenge now is that grid investments are still lagging, with more than 580 billion euros needed by 2030. More recently, we've experienced yet another price crisis linked to the ongoing war in Iran. The result, a new political drive at EU level for affordability. The risk, if this is not well managed, is a negative impact on investor confidence. So within this frame, this panel is going to explore one key question. What's the right balance between maximizing the use of existing grids and building new ones to deliver on Europe's clean electrification targets? And to do this, we'll follow 5 steps. The first one, your views. Then we'll do 3 rounds of discussions with our panelists. And finally, we'll have a round of takeaways for all of you. So let's start with your views. We can launch the Slido question. And we have this question for you, but also for our speakers to link with afterwards. Do you think that the grid's upgrade can be financed only by grid tariffs? Option A, yes. Option B, no way. The consumers are already paying too much. And option C, which is more diplomatic, is that it could be done partially by grid tariffs, but other means are needed. So take a look, use the QR code. You have around 10 seconds left, and we'll see the results. I see we have a very diplomatic audience. Very good. So now it's time for the debate. Let's welcome, with a big round of applause, our speakers. Please join me on stage. Olivia, partner at Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners. Olivia Breese. Thank you. CEO of E.ON Romania, Volker Raffel. SVP Europe at Siemens Grid Software, Ralf Blumenthal. The head of Europe at EA Technology, Michael de Vivo. And finally, EMEIA Digital Grid Leader at EY, John Bayard, please. Thank you very much. You're settled. So we'll start with a quick icebreaking icebreaker round for all of you. It's pretty straightforward. Between affordability and grid investments, do you think there's a way we can have both? And maybe we follow this order for this first round. Olivia, what would you think?
I think it's a great question. I think it's not a simple question, actually. And I think framing them as mutually exclusive is actually a really unhelpful part of the debate. For me, the thing that has to be understood is that you can only get to affordability through grid investment.
Yep.
And the other thing that's critically important is that not making grid investments, that's not a cost-free choice. Because for every 2 years that grid investments are delayed, the estimate is that consumers pay up to 60 billion euros more.
60 billion.
And the European Union itself estimates that by 2030, they'll be paying about 30 billion a year in congestion charging, managing congestion charges. So not acting doesn't necessarily create the kind of affordable environment that the question suggests.
The costs of inaction.
Yeah.
Volker.
Well, I would say the answer is easy. It's not investing in grids means no affordability. If we are really wanting to drive up power prices, we are not investing in grids, not connecting the cheapest source of energy, which is renewables, or just stopping there and not strengthening the grid, so we connect them, but we are not evacuating the energy from already invested capital. Or we are not connecting storages, which drives up peak prices in the evenings like hell. And I know what I'm talking about in the Romanian context. It's incredible. Or not to connect new consumers, which are bringing down grid tariffs again because they make use of it. So the real way of avoiding affordability is not to invest. And we even see that each euro invested brings up GDP in Romania. We have a study for it saying 1 euro invested brings 10 euro GDP growth. And we also know that each euro invested in grids brings down the energy invoice. And what the customer pays is the final invoice, including everything.
Can you repeat? So 1 euro invested means? 1 year investment means?
1 euro invested means 10 euro GDP growth.
10 euro GDP growth.
In the Romanian context, where currently, and I think that's not only in Romania true, the grid is a bottleneck. And by debottlenecking, you have not only the usual way of 1 euro invest makes some more rounds in the economy, it is debottlenecking what is hindering economic growth today.
Thank you. Ralf?
I couldn't agree more to what was just said. So I'd summarize it as, yes, it's possible, but only if we stop pretending that cheap grids are a matter of underinvestment. We have to invest to get them cheap. Only the properly funded grids are affordable. And I would even go further to what you said, the 1 year to 10, 0 euro equals to minus investments, and deindustrialization, which was touched in the previous session by multiple speakers. And as such, the grids, it's not a question about investing, it's about keeping competitiveness up. So it's a non-question, actually. If we do not continue to invest into capacity increase by means of physical grid expansions, but also by flexibility means and other capacity increasing measures, we will fall behind.
Michael?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Europe has 1,700 gigawatts stuck in connection queues. We paid 9 billion in congestion cost. Switching off renewables, we were not able to host. So in a way, we are running already the most expensive options we had on the table. So the good news is that we can only improve in a way, right? So the question for me would be, what gets us the most grid capacity per euro spent? And the cheapest one would be probably the grid that we have is the most cheapest one. That there's enough evidence today that we can increase grid capacity by 20, 30, 40% at a third of the cost of reinvestment, building grids. So it's not one or the others, it's sequential. Let's start with using better what we have and then invest with anticipatory investment, because the alternative of building ahead of demand is a delayed electrification that will cost more at the end, which is, I think we all agree that the cost of inaction is bigger than the cost of action. So.
Finally, John?
Yeah, building on some of what the panelists have already mentioned, I mean, this trade-off between investment and affordability is a global issue, and both the regulators and utilities are trying to figure out how to thread that needle. So first, looking at the scale of the challenge, so the EU grid package suggests that we need around 1.2 trillion euros of investment between now and 2040, 730 billion of that being from the distribution. And that aligns with some of the research we did for Grids for Speed, where we estimate around 67 billion of capital per year needs to be put in. That's double what we're doing today. So you see those numbers, and it's staggering, and your immediate instinct is we need to spend, spend, spend. But in the current economic crisis, we need to have affordability at the top of the queue as well. So we have to look at every lever we can to try and reduce the cost burden onto the consumers. So that's things like digitization, flexibility, anticipatory spending. And our analysis shows that done in combination, that can reduce the burden by 18%. That goes from the 67 billion per year to 55 billion per year. And that's 12 billion in savings that can be passed on to the ratepayer. And regulators are looking at this as well and expect it. So Ofgem in the UK just released their mandate last week saying that DNOs are not only going to have to be able to connect all the supply that's expected, but they're expected to build and flex as a mandate for building out the grid. So that means, yes, capital infrastructure needs to be put in place, but we're going to hold you to account to making sure that it's affordable as well.
Excellent.
So it has to be both.
Excellent. So let's now unpack the enablers for those investments to happen. We'll talk about capacity increase, we'll talk about digitalization and flexibility, and also financing. We'll start with the foundation, which is regulation. And I'm looking at you, Volker. From E.ON's perspective, what would you say is the ideal framework for DSOs to invest?
I think there are two key elements. So the first one is we heard about the huge numbers of investments that are needed. So this cannot be done by public money or EU money only. We need private money to make it happen. And this is very easy. The capital return must be in a way that the investment is happening. So that is key element number one. And again, regulators tend to tell, if energy is going cheaper and you still invest in grids, your percentage in the invoice is going up. But what would be the lesson out of it? We do not want to have cheaper energy, or cheaper energy does not deserve to be distributed? No, so we have to enable the grids, both IT, flex, and so on, but also in grids. Second element is exactly that one. Allow the operators to do the most efficient investments and do not hinder by saying, you only connect a battery if it is free to use a grid 100% of the time, if only 99.5% of the time already would enable to connect the battery. Otherwise, you just say no, by applying a stupid old rule which is not necessary anymore, or by saying IT investments are not needed, or by saying I only need grid. Actually, I just need both. And these two elements, do not tie the hands and ask them to do work. Give the return, it deserves the final invoice, and the final invoice is counting, and gives the flexibility the operators need.
Excellent. Ralf, you're working with DSOs as well across Europe. To which extent you think that regulation is fit for adopting new technologies?
Well, I think many struggle with what you just outlined, and yeah, there's different shades of gray across different countries in Europe and regulations in different countries. But the theme is the same everywhere, and I think there's a good reason that regulation was put in place back in the day, but now things have changed. So I think we also need to adapt to that. And well, if I were to put out what I see as a forward-thinking regulation is, in addition to incentivizing investments into the grid, physical investments into the grid, we also need, you mentioned it, to incentivize anticipatory investments, right, looking beyond what is in the next year or 5 years. We need to incentivize the overall expenses, because ultimately as a system we want to bring the costs down, and it's not just the capex that contributes to that. And lastly, we need to incentivize outcomes as well, right? in terms of utilization of grids, in terms of how fast can queues be reduced, how fast do connection requests take. So it's an outcome driven. It's more of the question how much, it's not, or it shouldn't be anymore only about the question how much did you spend, but how much capacity did you enable? And that touches upon so many things in the physical space, in the digital space, also in how utilities operate together with customers and generation companies, transmission companies, industrial companies, flex contracts, etc. It's unleashed if we change the perspective.
Excellent. Before we move on, would anyone like to comment on this point? Anyone else, or shall we move on? Otherwise, Ralf's comments made me think of an idea that one of my members tends to say, which is, are we really squeezing existing grid enough? Are we making it sweat? So here, maybe I could hear Michael's views. What do you think is the sweet spot between digitalizing the grid, ensuring it's secure, and meeting the demand, the new demand that is coming from data centers and EVs?
So we are running an energy transition on top of a grid that is below substation, is essentially blind. So think about that. We know more from parcels shipped by Amazon across Europe than electrons flowing in our grid. That's one of the biggest constraints on everything we are discussing so far, in my humble opinion. And that distribution grid, you mentioned that, so it should absorb 70% of renewables, and we have maybe less than 10% of visibility. So that's the most important point missing in the European grid package. We should put a bit more distribution blood within that EU package. So I would not treat those three separated, so security, connections, and planning as a separated budget. I would think about what is the foundation. So in my view, the foundation is digitalization. When you have digitalization, you have observability, and when you observe, you have everything else. So how can we secure what we don't see? It's not about transmission, again, it's about distribution. Same for connection. Today, having a digital twin in place, connecting a heat pump, it's a minute decision. Because today DSOs are applying, in most cases, worst case rule of thumb, saying no to connection because they don't have the data. And again, this is also useful for long-term planning, because once you have reliable data, this is the biggest foundation for anticipatory investment, because you are building your forecast on top of something you see. And then you are giving regulators evidence of investing in something you have a clear visibility. So I don't know any investors today keen to invest in a black box. We should turn the light on, and I think digitalization is a good way of doing that. So digitalization is not, so the problem is not, no, I think we all agree that digitalization is important. What my message is that without it, I guess the other affordability levers will not work. We need to turn the light on. That's my opinion.
Excellent. John, would you disagree?
No, I don't disagree. I think the fact is the sweet spot between digitization, security, and flexibility is not a fixed point. It's moving in terms of the context of technical, geopolitical, and economic criteria that's going on in the broader world. But if I look at those three, flexibility, so I mentioned the Ofgem determination, and the mantra is flex and build. This is an evolution of flex first, which is part of the last regulatory period. And the reason they changed this is because of the challenge around affordability, as well as the increase in demand on the network. And what it does is it fundamentally pushes the DNOs to answer a different question. It used to be, how can we use flexibility as a bridge to something, to building? Whereas now they're saying, where can we use flexibility as a permanent solution, and where can we not? So fundamentally, that's a different type of analytics process that has to happen for the utilities. And they're being asked to look and say, okay, this constraint, is this due to consistent load growth, like a data center that needs to be addressed by wires, or is it a peak that can be addressed through flexibility? And they're going to be holding the DNOs to account. If I look at the digitization, so again, this was one of the strategic levers that we had in our Grids for Speed report that can drive that 18% reduction. But if we make that a little bit more tangible, looking at connections specifically, in 2023, 26% of Europe's electrical infrastructure projects were delayed 12 months or more. A large component of that was from the permitting, application, and planning processes that are driven mostly by inefficient, multi-actor paper processes. Now, if we were able to just digitize those workflows on their own, it would yield 20% benefits. If we re-engineer the processes alongside, there's 40% benefit that comes with that. So if we think about the European context being able to stay competitive, but also security of supply and resiliency, having the ability to do that speed to connection is absolutely key, and digitization needs to be a piece of it. Finally, on the resiliency aspect, obviously this is critical, and more digital infrastructure means that we have a broader attack surface for bad actors. So what the EU grid package explicitly states is we need to make sure that there is physical and cybersecurity that is designed at the beginning of these large infrastructure projects, and call it resiliency by design. And this is fundamental. And if we look at the Baltic connector shutdown and the S-Link 2 damage, this is not academic, but it's something that we need to make sure we're dealing with now. And resilience is now at the top of board agendas. So I guess just to wrap that up, the sweet spot, I think the fact that it's a fixed point is a fallacy. We need to make sure that we recognize that it flexes with the technical, economic, and geopolitical dynamics. Utilities need to have the ability and the agility to shift their strategy and operations to meet the moment. And then they have to have the flexibility in operating model, supply chains, and digital infrastructure to meet the moment.
From this part of the table, is there consensus around Michael's and John's points, or would you like to challenge some of their statements?
I think use of flexibility, smart solutions definitely is needed because, as I said, if we rightly steer those few hours where the real bottlenecks occur, I think we really can free up far more capacity in the existing grids. That is true. Again, I also have to say, just connecting hundreds of thousands of new prosumers, projects all over the place, we also need just real wires. So there's no way around the grid. And here we go. That is why it is so important to unbottleneck our infrastructure in both meanings, way of using it and having it.
I think it's precisely that. It's not a question of physical first or steel first or digital first. It's capacity first. And whatever contributes to that is the name of the game. And in those regions where flexibility is starting to be used at grid scale, it's a very obvious investment case also for the utility, for the consumers who connect under a flex agreement, for example, and ultimately then the economic area. So if I take the example of the Netherlands, which is one of the most congested, seems to be one of the most congested distribution grids in Europe, flexibility can effectively reduce the number of connection requests. We see that, despite going up dramatically. So, and then when you look at how many of these connection requests have been permitted under the condition of being able to be curtailed if flexibility needs happen, there's just a very small fraction that's actually being activated. And therefore, you see how adding flexible capacity does not necessarily mean you always have to use it, but if you do it in a smart way, you can really make more out of the existing capacity. I think that's something to learn from.
Maybe I can add one more element. We also have to clean up the queues. In Romania, more than 70,000 megawatt connection requests are around. I think up to 10% are realistic. The example, just an example now with batteries, because the batteries are the new animal around. We agreed connection requests for 250 megawatt of battery storage in our distribution grid in northeastern Romania. None of the project managers were yet able to sign the contracts we offered. So, and this battery and it's new, hopefully it's coming, but in renewables it is a similar situation. And then, of course, we do first come, first serve.
Yep.
And then we are wasting time for someone who's not building it. And then the other one has to queue up later. And after 2 years, we say, okay, this one is not doing it, maybe now you come into the row. And that is not nonsense. And of course, on the other hand, you should not exaggerate by cleaning up the queue to reduce the queue to zero. Obviously, that also would be wrong.
So my take from this is that digitalization and flexibility can definitely help us optimizing existing networks and the new ones. But optimization alone won't eliminate the need to invest significantly, which begs the ugly question of who pays for it. And maybe I could turn to Olivia. What would you say to this? Do you think that DSOs alone can cover the investments needed for the energy transition?
Well, perhaps before I answer the question, it would be helpful to explain just briefly who Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners are, because then you'll see we have a vested interest in the answer. And we are really a hybrid developer, but also fundamentally an infrastructure fund. We're trusted by about 200 institutional investors across Europe. We have about 40 billion euros under management. And so that puts me in the position where I'm able to both understand, or start to understand at least, the multiple challenges that are being faced by DSOs across the spectrum, but also the needs and desires of investors. And the nice thing, or the useful thing, when you hear the sheer scale of the investments which are required in DSOs or into distribution grids rather than necessarily into DSOs, even if they're reduced by 20%, those numbers are still extremely significant. But those assets are very, very attractive for institutional capital. They're long dated, they're very stable, they have very little technical, if any, risk. They sit nicely in a portfolio because they're inflation linked, they're not linked to GDP, there's very little demand risk. And all of those things make it very possible, in theory, to marry institutional capital with DSO investment requirements. I think the challenge is doing that in a way which really targets that private capital at precisely what it is that the grid needs, and putting it only following the existing systems of putting it into the topco and then smearing it across the whole DSO, that's not efficient for consumers. And it runs the risk of driving up costs for everybody. What I think we need is a new set of partnerships between DSOs who know best what they need, between private capital who is probably best able to provide that very large-scale, long-dated, cheap, low-risk capital, but you also have to have the regulators at the table, because what you are creating is a new partnership and new regulatory models to enable that capital to come in efficiently, quickly, and at the lowest possible cost. And that is usually best done at this scale in partnership, rather than following the models which have got us so far, but cannot take us to 2050.
I think it's a good question, who pays. Yeah? One part is how much money needs to be paid for a well-functioning grid. The other one is also who pays for it, for instance, just in tariff structure. In Romania, we do not have yet a capacity part of the fee, it's just per megawatt hour. So what does it mean? People are reserving capacity just because it's for free. So, and then, of course, capacity is reserved, which is highly needed from someone else, but it's reserved. So I think the tariff structure plays a role in freeing up already to better make use of what we have there. And the other misunderstanding usually is of some regulators, and understand the frustration. Last week I've been at a conference where I had the honor to take a check from the Energy Commissioner of European Union for 100 million euro in Carmen project, our dynamic lane rating project in Southeastern Europe, enabling to better use the capacities. And there were regulators around by saying, you all tell the story and Eurelectric tells the story, we will have big electrification, but where is the electricity flowing? I do not see it in numbers. So there is a fear around, we need to protect customers from grid fees. We will publish soon a study made from a Romanian consulting company, Valorem, which says actually today the market price in wholesale market price in Spain is about 45 euro a megawatt hour. In Germany, it's 90. In Romania, it's 135. So if we are talking about competitiveness in Europe, we all definitely in Southeastern Europe are talking about it too. The study says if only we unbottleneck the grid rapidly, we can bring down the total wholesale market price by 40% in 10 years and already more than half in next 4 or 5 years. So this is a potential we have to unleash and to make use. And another study said there is no over-investment into grids because the macroeconomic downside of over-investing into the grids and also its better use is far less than under-investment into grids. And we talk about billions if you talk about Europe, many billions.
I think we also need to get away a bit of that fear of those big numbers, 584 billion, 100 billion a year now. If you do the math, right, and you assume that all of that surplus in investment needs to be paid by the consumer, right, just a fair assumption for now, you're increasing the electricity bill on average across Europe by equivalent of a third of a year, roughly, right, 4 months on top. So for some customers, this is 100 euros per year, for some it's a bit more per year on top. And I think we need to get the discussion to a point where the cost of not doing that becomes more tangible. Yeah. Because who would not like to pay a bit more for electricity if that secures your job and that of your kids and the society around you? Right? But that's not an angle that we usually take. We always bust onto the tariffs, but we forget that a cheap grid is not the solution. It's the well-invested grid that actually then has a bigger return.
I like that definition, well-invested grid. Very good. Any other comments? No?
I guess just one comment is the three topics are interlinked, right? So we have to have the capital so we can deploy the infrastructure. We have to have the digitization so we can capture that 18%. But we need to have the incentive structures and the policy in line to make sure that it's driving that behavior across the ecosystem of the players. So for me, it just they all need to be part of the solution going forward.
Good. So we are close to the end. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground. Our discussion started with a question about balancing affordability and investment. What's your takeaway from the panel that we've just had on how Europe can actually achieve that? And maybe we'll start with John, and we move towards.
Yeah, so I think we need to do three things to try and make that balance. So first of all, we have to ruthlessly prioritize investment. So focus on the congested nodes, the resilient risks, and the critical connection queue on the network. Secondly, I think we need to unlock flexibility at scale. So we have a lot we can do around improvement of liquidity, cross-market integration, and just instilling trust into the whole ecosystem. And thirdly, we have to make digital by design as the first and only option. In order to hit the scale, speed, and complexity of the problem at hand, that's our only option.
Michael?
We need to do three things. So it will be 6 at the end. First one, I think it's so resiliency, security, anticipatory investment. All of that is possible. I think if we turn the light on, we will attract investors and we will enter into partnerships mode. So that's the first element. The second one is if there is a bit of commission, legislations, and council in the room, we should put a bit more electrons, distribution electrons into the package. We cannot run something coming from transmission only top line without the bottom-up data. That's something very, very important. So negotiation should go into that as much as possible. And finally, partnership, I think it should be one of the key words at the end of these 2 days. If you look on a more high-level thinking of all our planetary crises, ocean acidifications, pollutions, and biodiversity loss and deforestation, all of that. Energy is the easiest one because we can measure, we can track, we see where we have to go. And the hard problems comes where you cannot really track things. So I think we are in a way the lucky stakeholders in that. We just need to be a bit more braver, to act, to go a bit fast and ally. There is no place for superheroes here. We have to make together something strong. That's my 3 points.
Ralf?
I think the speed of what is needed in the grids can only be achieved if Europe openly prioritizes this challenge as a top-tier competitiveness priority. And that means thinking about unlocking capacity at whatever it takes, physical or digital. It means going for utilization and outcome of grids rather than only looking at initial spends. Well, and it means doing, right? Getting into motion. I'm also taking that from the session this morning. We're not lacking ambition in Europe, but we're lacking shovel-ready capacity, right? That's what we're missing. And technology is there, we just got to get moving.
Volker?
I think this panel is quite encouraging. It shows us that there is still already potential in the existing grids to be better used, to make more use out of it, which frees up then the money we need to also strengthen the physical grids. So I would not be too much concerned that we really have to increase the grid tariffs by too much, because using efficiency, we also can operate more efficiently for sure. And by doing so, again, and that is the final bill that counts, we can bring down the energy prices significantly by doing it. And if we do so, we even can replace fuel, fossil fuel, we are importing and giving money to geopolitical countries, I would say. So the story here is broader than just talking about the actual grid. It's a broader story for Europe. It's a real story about competitiveness. And we can manage by not paying grid fees for energy which is not even produced, but by making better use of what we have.
Excellent. Olivia?
I think for me it's fundamentally comes down to systems thinking. What I take away from this panel is that we have the solutions we need in terms of making better use of our existing grids. We have the capital that we need to make the investments that we need, whether it comes from me or from you.
Or both.
Or both, probably. We all have the ambition. Europe has the ambition, but what we need is to bring those solutions together and present them with regulators systematically across and stop seeing grids as a small problem in a box that gets its own room and start seeing grids as the critical enabler not only for industrialization, not only for electrification, but actually for energy security as well.
Excellent. So what I take from you is that delivering Europe's electrification will require smarter use of existing networks, speed on the deployment of new infrastructure, supportive and forward-looking regulation, and innovative financing models. So now returning to our audience, please join me in thanking the excellent panelists with a round of applause.
Thank you. Really, really interesting. I think, I've just written down here, efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. Yeah, exactly right. Fabulous. Please give our panelists one more big round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you.